What's it mean to be thriving? What's it mean to be, if you will, to be to feel like you're involved, to feel like you're contributing? What's that mean to you? Because those are the ways that we're measured then the progress that we're making, and those are the ways that I believe that you can reach the hearts and soul of the people that you work with in order to make that happen. One of the reasons that we do what we do in working with people with disabilities because we want people with disabilities to be able to come together, but not just come together in a sheltered workshop somewhere, but to come together in the community where they can see other people like themselves, but they can see, they can make other friendships, they can get to know other people, and they can add color and vibrancy to their life that they can't if they just shelter themselves inside of a home.
Welcome to the Hart and Hustle podcast, Chris. Dude, I can't believe that we're going to be able to talk about, your unique perspectives in leading a amazing nonprofit organization with an amazing mission as well. So once again, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So Chris, I have a question for you. How would Chris be described, or how would you describe yourself if work wasn't a part of the equation? Who am I sitting across the digital table from?
You're sitting across the table from a person who has a good heart, who's passionate, who enjoys people, always looks for the best in people. I think I like to look for the best, but I appreciate the differences so much. When I've grown up actually for about 4 or 5 years on an Indian reservation, and then went from there to kind of the Midwest and lived in the heartland, if you will, in the middle of a bunch of cornfields. And so this was it was a great opportunity for me, I think, as I aged. To get real comfortable with a variety of different people, and I think that's made my life really blessed.
Let's rewind a little bit and talk about those early days on a
Yeah,
reservation. What was
right.
that like?
Well, it's I actually is my mother who taught on the reservation, and she was a first grade teacher. I was in third grade at the time. So we would come every morning. I'd help her get her classroom set up. And then I think the first girlfriend I ever had was named Susie Birdtail, and she was she was wonderful. I think the people that I got to know then and over the years, it was great to be exposed to another culture so early in my life as well. And understand because I was one of the few Caucasians who were there. And so to have that understanding of what it's like to be on the other side, to feel a little more like the minority. But it really gave me, I think, a great opportunity to, as we were just talking about, to understand differences and to appreciate those differences and people that you meet. And that's helped me throughout my career. So whether it's coming out of high school, going to the military, whether it's in college or at the workplace, being able to talk and hopefully identify with so many different people.
Thinking about where we came from, just as a society in general, when I think of America and the ideas that I grew up on, we were a melting pot, right?
Yes.
We were a mixing of cultures. I grew up in a biracial family. My father was Black, my mother was white, and I saw how the different elements of our cultures blended together. But me
Hmm.
also being light skinned, I was somebody who could fit in multiple locations.
Right.
But depending on the group of people I was with, I didn't look like everybody else. So I empathize for you in saying, we have to be able to exercise the perspective of being an outsider. And
Right.
that entire perspective comes with a different awareness, if that makes
Hmm.
sense, and
Hmm.
being able to accept others, but also opening up your heart enough to be willing to, I would say, entertain different customs and different cultures and seeing how you fit into those
Hmm.
things. And I feel like we've lost a little bit of that in society today.
I agree with you. I think that part of it as well is When I came to work in the disability community, one of the things I thought to myself before I came on was, if you're confined to a wheelchair like my uncle was, what must that be like? And there was, you hear about and you see people that kind of imitate that by saying, "Okay, I'm gonna take this wheelchair and stay in it and go for a mile." Well, that's a great way of trying to understand what it's like. But what I really hope to embrace, and I think this is part of who I am as a person, is accept the differences without imitating. What is it that what can you learn from? Appreciate those differences. Appreciate the abilities before you even talk about disabilities. And I think that's one of the things that's helped to prepare me for the role that I have now.
Let's talk about at work and the
Yes,
mission of at work. So give everybody an understanding of the landscape of the work that you're doing, and then I've got some
right.
follow-up questions as well.
AtWork is located in Washington State. We've been around for about 60 years. In fact, the organization was founded on the same year I was born. So, it's kind of like it was supposed to be. The prior CEO's name is Chris. My name's Chris. So it just all seemed to be destined in the sense that I would come here. But I think the thing that I love about at work is truly its mission, because when we talk about the vision of the company, the mission of the company, we're really talking about helping people with disabilities so that overall they can be involved, they can be contributing, they can be thriving within their communities. And that means a way of doing it is we focus on three different areas. One is we help people with disabilities to find employment through our job coaches. We work with them, help them to put resumes together, help them by matching a job maybe to their skills, their abilities, their interests. And then in addition to doing that, we have a transition program where we work with high school students. And as those high school students get ready to graduate from high school, we want to work with them so that we can help them find a job, and they go right from school into the job place if that's their choosing. And finally, we've worked with a community inclusion, and what that really means is that there was certainly a day in the disability community where people just stayed at home or they were placed in institutions and they weren't out among the community. And certainly, we think anyway that the best thing to do is to integrate people together and enjoy the richness of what that is like versus staying at home. And so it's we will do everything from gardening, if you will, to different activities. Go to the grocery store, just different types of community involvement activities, and that's at work.
I mean, it's an amazing mission, and I don't think it's easy enough for to communicate how everyone has an opportunity to be impacted by a loved one with a disability. Now, I want
Hmm.
to tell a personal story that I've never shared on the podcast before, but I have a younger cousin named William who unfortunately at the age of 15 years old got into a altercation with a 12-year-old at a gas station in Tacoma, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that altercation led to the 12-year-old pulling out a handgun and shooting at my cousin William, who was struck in the lower back and has been paralyzed from the waist down ever since he was
Mm-hmm.
15 years old. A
Yeah,
freak accident, but
yeah,
impacted the trajectory of his life and my family's life in ways that I can't even describe. And I
yeah.
know that you had a family experience as well with somebody who, from the state of Indiana,
Hmm.
was Mr. Basketball. Would you mind sharing
That's
that
right.
story with us as well?
Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry for that, but thank you so much for sharing it. It's pulls at my heart because it's why I do the things that I do as well, and why this organization exists. The way I've ended up here, if you will, is my uncle. Uncle Mark was literally Mr. Basketball of Indiana back in the 1960s, and I so admired him. He was very definitely a father figure for me. And when I was back there not very long ago, a few years back with my wife. We went and visited him, and as we were leaving on our way to the airport, my wife said to me, "Did you notice that he just said 'see you later'?" And I said, "Well, he always says 'see you later.'" But she, who's very observant and intuitive, said, "Yeah, uh, but he he didn't." I'm sorry, that story, Keenan. It was what he
The way
didn't
that
say
I,
was
the
"see you
way,
later."
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. The way that I didn't,
yeah.
he
He
said,
said,
take care of
"See,
yourself, Chris, right?
yes, take care of yourself, Chris." And he didn't say "see you later," and as a result of that, it kind of stuck on my mind, and I was thinking through it, but I should have acted more quickly because a few days later, I get a call indicating that he had committed suicide because he just couldn't really take it any longer after being confined to a wheelchair. He wasn't able to do the things that he used to do, and I think he started doubting his own worth. And based on that, that led me to start looking at my own life and what is it that I could do to work with people to help them recognize, understand that they have value, and there are people out there that are, would certainly miss them and want to be there for that cry of help and do a much better job of reaching out more quickly than at that time I did.
But there's nothing that I know it's easy to open up our hearts and say, what could I have done in that
Yeah.
situation? And I feel like that's very much a human response, but it worries me that we kind of live in a society today where different is looked down upon, right?
Hmm.
Depending on your situations and the things that you go through in life. I think we are by far in a time in history where the biggest problem in our society is not another outbreak of a pandemic, but it is the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. When we
So
don't
true.
have our sense of community, our sense of togetherness, and
Hmm.
the community that we can lean on, it's very
Yes.
easy to find that we look at ourselves as not having worth when sometimes
Hmm.
just a simple conversation with somebody else who truly cares about us is that mirror that we need to see our true worth in, if that makes sense.
Without a doubt, and I think that uh, hits very closely to at work because that's one of the reasons that we do what we do in working with people with disabilities because we want people with disabilities to be able to come together, but not just come together in a sheltered workshop somewhere, but to come together in the community where they can see other people like themselves, but they can see, they can make other friendships, they can get to know other people, and they can add color and vibrancy to their life that they can't if they just shelter themselves inside of a home.
We are a beautiful painting, if you will, and
So
each one of
true.
the strokes in our lives adds to that masterpiece. One of the things
That's
that
right.
truly inspired me, Chris, about our last conversation is you talked about your history in the for profit world. And
Hmm.
when the opportunity came up at work, you said, I feel like all of the other experiences that I've had have been leading me towards this. Let's talk a little bit about that.
That's so true, and that's what I encourage others to do as well. Is that so many people I think went through the pandemic and came out of it wondering, like all of us should, what is it that I want to do with this one precious life? And for me, I had a long history of working for-profit businesses, uh, and when I stepped back shortly after my uncle passed away, I started thinking, what is it that I want to do? And as I went through my resume and was looking at different opportunities, there was a lot that was a natural jump, if you will, from the position that I was working in before to maybe doing that same type of work at another company. But what I noticed is I was starting at the top of my resume and looking at, here are my abilities, here's the things that I've done, here are all my jobs, if you will, the type of roles I've had, here's my professional education. And then at the very bottom of that resume is here are the nonprofits I have worked for, predominantly as a board member, as a volunteer. And as I started thinking about that, I started realizing that those, for me, were some of the best experiences that I've ever had. It's where I felt like uh, I know I had a mentor of mine once that said, uh, the best thing that you can have is to wake up in the morning, get out of bed, knowing that you're going to fun, not going to work. Well, I have one better than that that applies to me anyway, and that is I'm going to a cause. I'm not going to work. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so I literally flipped my resume upside down and started with was it about those nonprofits that gave me that joy, and I think happenstance I started looking, and within 2 or 3 days I saw an ad for a CEO position at Work, uh, and I started looking at the cause and feeling like that's exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to be at a place that where no one else would necessarily have to experience, if I could help it, what I experienced with my uncle Mark passing away. And I just wanted to be able to do some good and apply the things that I've done in the past. And I think that's what Keenan had really helped, was to say, hey, I have the strategy part, I have the leadership part, I have the operational part in my backgrounds of all the things that I've done. And all those things are transferable and more into working for this nonprofit.
I mean, I feel like it's a beautiful journey to think about some of the experiences that we have along the way.
Mhm.
Often, when I come across hardship or I've come across tough times in my life, it's very easy for me to ask, why is this happening to me? Or what am I going to be able to
Right.
gain from this experience? But later in life, when we're farther down the journey, we start
Yeah.
realizing that the strategy work that I did at the time that maybe wasn't the most fulfilling now gives me the
Mhm.
ability to show up as my best self for this opportunity. And
Right.
I think that perspective is something that we need a little bit more of in this world
Hmm.
of instant gratification. It's very easy to understand, like, why am I doing this, for what result? But often, you're a beautiful testament to it, some of the experiences that we go through lead us down a path that is super fulfilling. Did you find joy in any other areas of your early professional career that you've had now?
Oh, absolutely. I think uh, I always try to take something away from the roles I've been in, and I went right from high school into the military, and so I had a very structured childhood. Had to polish my shoes every morning and or every evening, and uh, keep my room neat, tidy, all the different things that then became, hey, this is so easy when I went in the military, because I can remember the drill instructor in front of me just so close that I could feel actually the spit coming out of out of his mouth when he said, what are you doing here? And I said, I feel like I'm at home, sir. And he said, at home, he said, and then he just looked at me right in the eye and he said, you're either going to be the, the biggest screw up this military has ever had, or you're going to be the best soldier that we've ever had. And I can't speak to that, but I can speak to the fact that I had a great time in the military in terms of growing, learning, and really branching out from those years where you're growing up. And I went from that to finish my 4 years of college for my bachelor's in 2 years. I did it in 2 years because I was really, again, motivated to get through it. Came out, had that leadership experience, and I started interviewing. Ended up at a large insurance company, and as I'm thinking about my background and answering the questions, I find out that yes, I got offered the job. But the reason I was offered the job is they never saw anyone's shoes as polished as my shoes were, and and so it just goes to show you that uh, you can prepare, you can do so many things, but sometimes it's that thing that you never thought of, but it's essentially who you are. And so you're taking that, as I did, to other roles. So I started in insurance companies and did underwriting, which really looking at eligibility for people. I was worked my way up through that to kind of a director of underwriting. Then I had the opportunity to move over to lead a life insurance company. So I did that and then moved over to direct all the sales for another insurance company, and it's turned out really well. Plus, I became very, very interested in customer experience and went from that background to Delta Dental. And I became the first director of, they call it patient, rather a customer, but I can argue that, but the director of patient experience for any of the Delta Dental companies. And then finally, I kind of took a sidestep and decided to work for a startup. I think I was employee number 4 or so, and that gave me a lot of experience with regards to taking some of the things that were done around innovation in the past into the startup. And then shortly around that, after about a year of that, that's when my uncle had passed away, and I lost both my parents, unfortunately, during COVID. So it was really a time of self reflection, which is just one thing I would say is that I had another mentor that told me once, people will often ask the universe, why is this happening? What can I learn from this? But then they don't stop and be quiet and listen. They keep asking those questions. But if you have that pause, if you just stop and you listen, and have faith that that answer is going to come, then that's what I did. I had a lot of quiet, pensive moments, and all of a sudden things started falling into place.
As it normally does,
Yeah,
right?
so true.
All good things take time. One of my
It does.
father's sayings when I was growing up, he said, "This too shall pass."
Mm-hmm.
And everything happens for a reason. Those are the two statements that I remember from my childhood. Everything
Yeah.
happens for a reason was coming from my mom, and this too shall pass from my dad. And those
Yeah.
two statements have helped me get through a lot of tough times because, very much like your analogy, um,
Mm-hmm.
when we ask the universe or God or whatever you want to
Yes.
asks, like, I wish I was more patient. Why can't you make me more patient, God? You're not given
Mm-hmm.
patience as a trait, but you're given opportunities to practice that patience and
Well,
given
that's
opportunities to practice what you ask for. And it seems like your entire career has
mm-hmm.
been honing you for this amazing opportunity. But I know that the landscape of nonprofits is not easy, especially when you're coming from a business like Delta Dental, right? That's got
Right.
amazing acquisition, large footprint, lots of money coming in, cash flow. What are some of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest challenges that you've noticed with the nonprofit world today?
Well, certainly there's a lot of challenges that are similar to for profits. Uh, but I think with a nonprofit, the thing that is always hanging over your head is funding. How are you going to pay the bills? And for AtWork, for a lot of organizations that do the same type of work that we do, uh, it's being able to cover the expenses of working with people with disabilities. And so I know from when we look at things that we get as it relates to grants from the state, from federal government, it covers about 70% of the cost. And we did the state actually, Washington State did a rate study a couple of years back. And we are probably about $24 an hour less than what that rate study said.
Oh
Uh,
my
but
goodness.
which uh, which is one of those things that again, there's only so much money. I get that, and there's only so much tax burden you can put on people as well. I get that, but it's a little like you're trying to climb up to a summit, and someone throws you down a 70-foot rope, but it's 100 foot high. So what are you going to do with that other 30 feet? How are you going to get that? And so, one of the difficulties with on a nonprofit is we have a couple of for-profit enterprises to try to make up that other 30 feet, if you will, or the 30% that you have to pay. and need to pay in order to do the things that we want that are related to our mission. But that's not uh, that's not an easy endeavor, because like any for-profit enterprise, you have the challenges then of making that profit. So as CEO, you have to be thinking about how are we doing on the for-profit and how are we doing for the nonprofit, because one helps to feed the other. And so the same thing is true of, if you will, all our accounting and finance. When you're with a for-profit company, here's what you should do from a bookkeeping standpoint or for a record standpoint. But at this organization, you got to know it from a for-profit side as well as a nonprofit side. So it's very, very challenging.
I want to level set this for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we're talking about here is you at work have an
Mm-hmm.
amazing mission where from the state, you guys are a nonprofit, you guys get about 70% of necessary cost filled or fulfilled by the government. So, you're about 70%, 30% deficit. So, what you're saying
Yes.
is your organization has had to stand up for profit organizations to be able to fill that 30%. What
Right.
business can you point us towards that you guys have been able to stand up and manage that is helping fill
Mm-hmm.
some of the gaps at work?
Well, we have a very large landscaping business that we have, which is one of our subsidiaries is ACE, which is At Work Commercial Enterprises. And so we do landscaping all year long, uh, from the top of the state to the bottom of the state, and really all along this part of Western Washington. We have contracts with government agencies to do their landscaping, contracts with businesses. Wherever we can find landscaping work, we do that. In addition to that, Keenan, we have a number of other things that we do that ranges from doing imaging for companies to another service that works with Parks and Wildlife for looking at salmon hatcheries and helping to collect samples for, and then taking those samples and giving them back to the state for further analysis. Just a number of different things that we do to try to make money. Now, I'm not complaining about, if you will, the 70% versus the 30% that we have to raise through for profits. It's just right now, it's a fact of the matter. It's something that has to occur. Uh, but when you ask about that challenge, if you will, it's, I can dream of a time where I could just look at the nonprofit and completely focus on that nonprofit versus having energy that's placed over on the for profits in order for them to be profitable as well. So in that sense, it's a stretch, um, but it's where real learning comes from, and I think that's I'll take it, if you will, as an opportunity versus as a challenge that can't be overcome.
One of the really cool topics of our discussion when we first met together was the idea of curiosity in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing you have such an amazing mission at work. Now you're saying, okay, now I have to be curious enough to think about how am I going to stand up, optimize, and operate these other business models and channels to be able to
Right.
fulfill on the mission that we have at work. When you took
Mm-hmm.
the role as CEO, were you kind of perplexed that there was a lot of complexity that was going on in order to fund the organization? What were those early days like when you kind of sat in the seat and were like, this is a little bit more than I was
Oh.
thinking, maybe?
Well, it's the proverbial drinking from the fire hose. I came out of organizations that had their own language. I mean, if you're in the dental industry and you have all the terms that you have to know, same with insurance, and then coming to this nonprofit, all there was to know the abbreviations of different agencies. Yes, it seemed very, very complex. But I think that's been something that I've been gifted with as well, is curiosity. So I didn't come in pretending to know anything. other than the experience that I had. So it was really brought in from a leadership standpoint. But what I wanted to do was just to absorb, soak in everything that I could. So whether it was reading, talking to people, going out in the field, spending time with people with disabilities, I had the great opportunity to spend a lot of one-on-one time with the prior CEO as well as others, board members, and that certainly helped to close that gap between what was and what is. And I think that curiosity. I have 5 children, all grown, but when they were younger, I would say every one of them, as most kids will do, ask question after question after question, and that can get tedious. But as a parent, uh, I've tried to instill upon them the importance of asking those questions, because if you start squashing it at that young age, then you don't get that you don't take that forward with you. You learn to kind of quiet the questions. And I know that's, of course, one thing that you learn in the military is that you're given an order to do, and you're not supposed to ask questions. You're supposed to do it. uh, but I think you still find the soldiers asking questions. So why do we have to do this versus this? And to me, that's just a sign one of intelligence, but another of trying to get to the best answer, the best response, the best way of doing something. And that happens through curiosity as a part of innovation.
I mean, that's a beautiful area of discussion for a second. In another collaboration I had with a leader named Chris Gillett, who is the former vice president of global employee engagement for DHL, we talked about
Mm,
asking questions. He
yes.
said, a lot of large corporations will say, when you come into an organization, you put your head down, you look around, and you learn as much as possible, but don't get in the way. Here at
Mm-hmm.
DHL, as he described it, we said, in your first 60 days, you ask as many questions as possible. Because
Sure.
often, if you've been in the organization for too long, you're too close to the problem and you often can't even see it. And so
Without a
when I
doubt.
think about the world of nonprofits, innovation comes with curiosity almost as a double deal,
Mm-hmm.
right? If
Mm-hmm.
we need to do things differently, we have to encourage our team members to ask questions because they come from different perspectives. And those questions can lead to innovations that help us do our job better. They also lead to efficiencies. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, especially in the world that you're in the nonprofit space, that innovation and curiosity leads to different perspectives on how we tackle these challenges that we're not going to be able to do so otherwise.
So true. I think it's tied into uh, nonprofits uh, tend to, in my experience anyway, have a stronger drive towards the cause. They talk about uh, we're in this cause. Uh, this is the reason I get up in the morning. This is what I'm passionate about. Uh, I think on a for-profit side, yes, you can have that same amount of zeal, that passion, but ordinarily it's not the same. And I think that part of that has to do with just the nature of really understanding how that mission pulls towards you. And I think that by asking, as you were talking about, that curiosity, leading to innovation, it's really about, again, not thinking about as a CEO, as an example, what can I do for this organization? Instead, it's what can I do for this cause? And that's the thing that helps to move the organization forward. And another thing on the asking questions, I think, is that when I think about our vision about people with disabilities to be, uh, if you will, involved, contributing, thriving, uh, one thing that hasn't been done that I want to do coming up here in the next year to 2 years is what's that mean to a person with disabilities? that's part of my customer experience background. I want to hear in that language. I want to hear in those descriptions. What's it mean to be thriving? What's it mean to be, if you will, to be to feel like you're involved, to feel like you're contributing? What's that mean to you? Because those are the ways that we're measured then the progress that we're making. And those are the ways that I believe that you can reach the hearts and soul of the people that you work with in order to make that happen.
For every other business leader, founder, CEO who's listening to this episode right now, I want you to rewind a couple seconds and listen to exactly what Chris said. He said, in order to create the best experience, you go out and you talk to your customer. You ask them, how do you feel fulfilled? Because we have a perspective as leaders of a business or business
Right.
leaders in general, where we think we know, but the answer is literally right in front of you by taking the time to be curious enough, once again, to be
Yes.
intentional in asking people, how can we better formulate our message here? And what does it mean to you? Because those
Yes.
two pieces of feedback are completely different, but somewhere in the middle is an amazing answer. And I love that initiative for you over the next 2 years, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's something that I believe uh, really does come out of the customer experience of work that I've done in the past. When I started at Delta Dental, I think I mentioned to you that I said I was the first director of patient experience, but I argued that it was director of customer experience. And I remember talking to the CEO, and he was pretty certain that you should call it patient experience, not customer experience, because they're a patient when they sit in the dental chair. And my argument was, but when we send them an explanation of benefits, they're a customer, they're not a patient. When they think of Delta Dental, they're thinking, okay, I have these dental benefits. I'm a customer of theirs. I'm not a patient of theirs. And he said, prove it to me. So that's when I went out, did some customer focus groups, but I didn't just use Delta Dental customers or members. Instead, we pulled in a lot of different people. And so that the end of that story is that it was a very compelling evidence that the relationship they have with Delta Dental was this customer. The reason I bring that up is that it's important for any organization to ask what's the relationship they have with the customer. That's what they think may not be what the customer thinks. So you got to ask the customer, what's your relationship with our company? What's your relationship with companies like ours? How would you describe it? And that sometimes will give you a whole different perspective.
I mean, this is what makes you such a great leader, Chris. Your
Yeah.
willingness to go back to the grassroots and ask the tough questions, but also, I would say, warrant feedback from the people who are truly involved in the processes gives you the opportunity, the advantage that a lot of people aren't willing, especially in leadership, to be able to
Mm-hmm.
go back and I would say humble themselves to ask those types of questions. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so difficult for leaders of large organizations to take that perspective when a CEO of maybe a small startup or something like that is willing to listen to feedback? That's a really
Right.
interesting dichotomy that's kind of bouncing around in my head right now.
Well, I think one of the greatest definitions I ever heard of leadership was leadership is the art of asking the well packed question. I think that there are leaders who don't want to ask the question, but then I don't think that they will be stretched as far as they might otherwise ask or they might otherwise be. I do think that in order to be successful, you have to be willing to ask the questions and you have to be willing to hear the answers. You know, a lot of companies do culture surveys. And I was with a company that I was a director of a company, did a culture survey. And one of the questions was, uh, how much confidence do you have? No, I'm sorry. Are you confident in senior leadership? And it scored really poorly. And so the executive team for the organization called in all the senior leaders and they said, people are just the people that work here, our employees. They're not confident in you. Why aren't they confident in you? It's like, no, no, no. Who did they mean? it was it's the it was that senior leadership. And when you start breaking it down, they were talking about executive leadership. And that's just part of if sometimes you hear the answer, but it's the answer you don't want to hear. You got to be open to hear. Well, you might be hoping to hear this answer, but the value is in the actual answer, and then you got to figure out how to best leverage that, make changes to it that'll make the world of difference in that organization.
Man, I think of two things. I think of all the value that you're bringing to this podcast right now, but also I am incredibly envious of the other younger leaders who are working underneath you right now, Chris. If me and you can spend 40 minutes together and you can share and I can rub off as much knowledge and I would say perspectives that I've been able to, I know that the future leaders of At Work are getting to,
Right.
I would say, gather so much knowledge as they just kind of spend time with you. That transfer of knowledge is so beautiful. And you got to be building such an amazing team, man. I can see it from the outside.
We have a great team, and certainly the within the community, other organizations work with people with disabilities. Amazing group of people, and I'm not bashful about learning from them and asking questions. And I know that there's been times in different remote meetings or in-person meetings where I've said, "Excuse me, I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but what about this? What about that?" And I think that it is um, it's a blessing to be able to share things that experiences that you had with others, because I've had that opportunity. And I've learned so much from people that I've worked with, and I've sought after people that I wanted to learn from. There may have been people that I didn't really necessarily like, but there was some aspect about them I just wanted to get in there and learn how they think like that, and that's made a tremendous difference for me. And as I tell people that I work with, I'm, in the next 20 years, or whenever it might be, if I'm sitting in a rocking chair in front of my home, I know what I will be recalling, God willing, is the people that I worked with, not about what was our revenue, the revenue generated, the bottom line, the profit that we had, not about the number of what was the growth that we had in 2024. Instead, it's going to be, I remember this person asking this question. I remember interacting with this person. And when it comes down to it, those to me are the memorable uh, moments that build a life that's worth living.
I wish we could end the podcast right there because that's an amazing way to kind of put a bow on this. But I have to ask you, what does the future of At Work look like? Let's talk about your vision for, let's say, the next 5 years. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we hoping for?
Well, we're certainly it's going to be uh, all hands on deck working towards the vision of this organization. And so we've defined that vision, or we described it, is a better way of saying it. We've described the vision shared with you, but we haven't defined it in terms of people with disabilities. So I want that defined, and I want to know where we are now, and based upon those definitions, and where we want to be. And that's the creative tension between the two. There was, I remember long ago, I read a book by Peter Senge called The Fifth Discipline. And he talks about creative tension. And he does it through kind of showing your two hands and a rubber band between the two. He said, here's where you are, here's where you want to be. So you have this tension on the rubber band. The only way you can release it is by either lowering where it is that you want to go, or if you're not willing to do that, then it's moving up from where you are, closing that gap. So in the next 5 years, what we'll be on is to close that gap. I want that creative tension. I want to know what will make the difference for the people that we have the opportunity to work with. And then we're working on really I would say there's about four different areas. One is working on innovation. We've talked a little bit about that, but certainly there's some progress that we can make through innovation with people with disabilities, and some of the things are borrowing from other fields in order to help people with disabilities. I think also the providing even more high quality services to families than we're able to do today. That would be one of the things we focus on. Uh, the other thing that you learn from nonprofits is that you're in a community of other organizations that are doing similar things. And there are some nonprofits that may not be doing what you're doing today, but you can partner with them, you can work with them collaboratively to do something better than you could ever do by yourself. And I guess the fourth thing that I would see us working on in those 5 years is the continued movement on DEI initiatives. You know, I talk about marginalized populations, and people with disabilities are the largest marginalized population in the United States. About 20%. You can hear some people say as high as 25%, but 20% of the population is either intellectually or developmentally disabled. And when you take that even further to say, well, we work with these people, these races, these groups of people. But as you look at other marginalized races, and then you take those people with disabilities, they're not getting reached. And so I want to provide an opportunity for us to reach the people that were hardest to reach, the people that may not knew of opportunities, the people that culturally may not have known also some of the opportunities that exist where we can work together. And that's really, uh, breaking down barriers in order to move the organization forward.
Such an inspiration. Seriously, Chris. I want to land the plane officially here by asking a question that came from our previous guest, and I'm really excited to hear your answer on this. Our
Okay.
previous guest wanted to ask the simple question: what is the most important lesson you've learned from your journey thus far?
Wow. Okay. The most important lesson by far on that journey is to know yourself. It is to really look at yourself in such a way that I think it was a German philosopher uh, that said, and in the recesses of your mind, where you're covered up, therein is the lie. So when you look at yourself, what lies are you telling yourself? What blankets are covering up things that if you were to uncover, might just unleash a whole amount of emotion. But if you can work through that, if you can get from where you are to the person that you want to be and keep moving towards that, then you're not only be the best version of yourself, but you'll be able to help others as well. And so when I hear people talk about taking, this journey that people are on, the I always step back and say, as a leader, the first person you have to be able to lead is yourself. And the way that you lead yourself is to understand yourself, understand what you need to change, understand where your weaknesses are. It doesn't mean that you accept them, but you understand them and you work on what does that mean? How far back does that go? What are those voices that tell you you can't? And how do you get past that so that you can? So that's what I would say.
Well, that's an amazing place for us to be able to put a wrap on today's episode. Once again, for everyone here who's been tuning in, watching, and listening, this is another episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. That's a wrap.